one.
All right, today we will be talking about the levels of organization as far as ecological levels go. So the first part we have here is ecologists. They study organisms and their environments at different levels of organization, from biome all the way down to organism. So the biosphere, it consists of all organisms on Earth. Okay, so the biosphere is the entire Earth and all the living things on it. So after biosphere, the next level will be biome, and this is what we're doing for our project. This is a group of ecosystems that have the same climate and dominant communities. So that means dominant communities means the communities that are most common. The next level after biome is an ecosystem. So ecosystems consist of living things and their environment. So the living things and their environment would be the next level, which is ecosystem. So it's a little bit smaller than the biome. After that, you have community. So we're getting smaller now. We're down to a community. This consists of populations of different species that live in the same area and they interact together. So community is smaller than the ecosystem because this takes just species that have interactions with each other, whereas the ecosystem is larger and they might not quite interact with each other even though they live in the same ecosystem. Getting smaller again, now we have population. So a population, this is organisms of the same species that live in the same area and they interact with one another and produce fertile offspring. So a population has to be the same species. So you'd say a population of bears, a population of humans, right? When you're driving down the highway and it'll say, welcome to New Braunfels, population, 95,000. Well, that's referring to humans, right? Because it's a population of the same species that interact with each other and are able to produce offspring. Our next level is organisms. So organisms are individual living things, right? So we have some pictures there, some different organisms. This is the lowest level of ecological organization. So biologists, they study organisms, organ systems, organs, tissues, and cells. So ecologists are studying a larger level, more of a macro level, going from biosphere down to organisms. And then biology, because some people, when you look up levels of organization, you'll see the biology part of it, which you'll learn next year. And that's from organisms down to cells. All right, our favorite time, recap time. What are the ecological levels of organization from largest to smallest, starting with biome? All right, so organisms and the environment. So organisms are life form consisting of one or more cells. So we've talked about all the kingdoms and domains which characterize things as having life. And the environment includes both biotic and non-living abiotic factors. So biotic is living organisms, which you see here on the left, which this is a rainforest with tons and tons of living organisms. Abiotic, non-living or physical factors over here on the right. You see water and the mountains and things over here on the right that are abiotic. Together, they determine how productive the ecosystem in which the organisms live. So the more biotic in factors or the more abiotic factors in how they interact could determine the success or downfall of the ecosystem. Oh my gosh, again, recap time. So for this one, just make a T-chart and list at least 5 abiotic and 5 biotic factors in your biome that you're working on in your project. So not just general ones. I want specific 5 abiotic and 5 biotic factors that you have found so far in your project. All right, so what's a population? A population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area. How large a population is and how fast it grows are often used to measure its health. So if a population is growing quickly and the organisms are able to thrive and reproduce, then that's going to be measured as a good or a healthy population. A community. Communities are made up of populations of different species. So like wolves and foxes and hawks all living in the same area. So a community is the biotic part of an ecosystem. So it's the communities, the living things in the ecosystem. It consists of all the populations of all the species in the same area and their interactions. So think of community kind of like the food web, right? They all live together, they interact, some eat others, and they have some sort of interaction with one another. What's an ecosystem? So an ecosystem consists of all the biotic and abiotic factors in the area and their interactions. And ecosystems can be very different in size. So a lake can be considered an ecosystem, and it says so could a dead log. Both the lake and log contain a variety of species that interact with one another and abiotic factors. So a lake could be a very large ecosystem, whereas a log would be obviously a much smaller ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, something called a niche. This is an organism's role, where it lives, and which organisms use the conditions. So it's the food it eats, its place in the food web, how it gets food, the temperatures or the factors it needs to survive, and how it reproduces. That's its niche. So every organism has its role within the ecosystem. Habitat, this is the physical environment to which an organism has become adapted and survives. What are biomes? So a biome is a group of similar ecosystems with the same general abiotic factors and primary producers. Biomes may be terrestrial, on land, or aquatic, in the water. So think about that again. So we have a group of similar ecosystems. So ecosystems that are very similar, having similar primary producers meaning plants, right? So they have a lot of the same plant life, a lot of the same animal life, and then they have the same abiotic factors. Remember, abiotic climate, so their climates will be very similar, levels of sunlight, things like that are abiotic factors. They're going to be very similar, and that's what makes it a biome. And finally, our biosphere, our largest level, is the global sum of all ecosystems, meaning all ecosystems on Earth. It's all the living things and their relationships, including the interactions within the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. Okay, so the biosphere talks about how it interacts also with the other spheres.